I think New Zealanders give Australians the shift after lunch because we're the only people who can keep you awake. You weren't told the story, the second half of the story that was just explained about my first organising experience. I was 15 at the time, and we'd built these canoes, and we went down the Shoalhaven River, and we had to take the canoes down a fairly steep cliff area into a gorge in the Shoalhaven River. I was 15 and just before my school certificate, which is the first public exam that we do in New South Wales prior to the final years of high school, and one of the team of us went over the cliff with the canoe attached to him, and I learned my organising skills by we had to get the Cliff Rescue Squad to come and take him out of the gorge, and that was quite a salutary experience about risk management. I don't know, the staff who've worked with me over the years would say risk management has never been one of my strengths, so perhaps don't go canoeing with me anytime soon. I think this discussion about building enterprises that empower communities and this whole conference is really quite a critical time for us to be having this conversation. I don't know about you, but I feel a bit shell-shocked by the both natural and man-made challenges that the world seems to be facing at the moment, not just in this country, but in many parts of the world. When you look at the Middle East and what's happening there, the deep desire of people for freedom and democracy, but the pain of war. When you look at climate change and what it's doing to our globe, when you look at the massive poverty that is so much a part of the world and the social problems that eventuate around that, I sometimes feel like I could be on my pessimistic foot most of the day. Fortunately, I am an optimistic person, and I was very encouraged when I heard a talk by a guy called Bill Drayton from Ashoka that some of you may have heard of, when he talks about every citizen needs to be a change maker. And I feel like that's the challenge of today. It's not enough for there to be a small minority of us wanting to change the world and build better, more resilient, more sustainable communities. We need every citizen to take up that responsibility. It is part and parcel, in my mind, of the task of citizenship. But I think that's not something that most people get. So I would hope that in this conversation today, and over the next few days, that's one of the issues that we're going to talk about. I guess another kind of random thought that occurred to me as I was listening to presentations this morning and the conversations at various points around the conference is that sometimes I think we tend to paint ourselves in an us and them kind of world, or an us and them dyad, where those of us who are, if you like, fighting for or working for communities that are resilient and that find their own futures, find ourselves sometimes in opposition to either business or government or power, the principalities and powers, if you want, around us, and we feel like we're really struggling with a pretty nasty and difficult enemy. I guess I want to help us potentially try to reframe that thinking and that conversation, because I actually don't think it's going to help. I believe that we have to bring business and government with us on this journey if we're to have any chance of seeing the kind of massive transformation that our world is going to need. We can't afford for anybody to be kind of fighting against us in this battle, because it is actually not going to work. So I want to encourage you to think about, we're not trying to create an alternative economy here, we're trying to create an economy that works for all citizens. Last year I found this conference incredibly stimulating and challenging and very helpful. And I think there is something very valuable happening here in New Zealand that many of us who are, in a sense, sharing the journey with you, have a lot to learn from this journey. And I wish we could have the same kind of conversation in Australia. Unfortunately, I think our economy feels like, to a lot of people, we're in too good a shape. The fact is we're incredibly dependent on the minerals we're digging out of the ground, and that's not going to go on forever. And nor are we going to be able to depend on China forever to bail us out. Really, Australia is a very vulnerable economy. And as a nation, I think we're in just as bad a shape as any other part of the world, but at the moment we are living in a fool's paradise. And I think we're going to have to rethink that pretty soon. But anyway, so I think this journey about community economic development is about a marathon rather than a sprint. So I hope we can have some of those deeper and more penetrating conversations here, as well as the buzz of a conference like this. So let's talk about building enterprises that empower communities. What I want to do this afternoon is share with you some of my personal journey, the story, the ups and the downs. I don't know about you, but I find I learn more from other people's failures than I do from their successes. So I'm going to try and share with you some of the tough phases in the journey, because I think actually often that's where most of us learn. First of all, I want to talk a little about what social enterprise offers. And I think it is about a renewed vision for economic empowerment and for wealth creation in communities. Those of us in the who've worked in the social welfare world, I think, got pretty good at working out how to manage poverty. But not too many of us learned about how to do wealth creation. And I think that's what community economic development brings to the conversation, and what's most critical about it. Mind you, I still think we've got a long way to go if we're serious about wealth creation and shared wealth creation. Also, for many groups, social enterprise offers funds that communities or that organisations can choose how to use, rather than funds that are tied up with red tape, if you like, from government or from some other source, from some other donor. Every dollar that comes from a government or donor has a string attached to it. The challenge, from my point of view, often is to figure out what the strings are, because there's the ones that are in the contract that you sign, and then there's the strings that you don't see that you discover when you offend them. So I think free choosing money. Mind you, somebody once told me that when I moved from being a government employee, which I did in the first couple of years of my life and found it very challenging, when I moved from that to setting up a social enterprise, and this was in 1979, before the term social enterprise was being used, that in fact what I was doing is I was swapping one boss for 1,000 bosses. And in some respects, I think that's true. And anybody who goes into small business, I think, learns pretty quickly that every customer becomes your boss. That often is quite challenging too. Reduced dependence on government, I think, is important, despite the fact that I think government must be a contributor to what we do, because government is us, after all. Next, I think, is this whole issue about enterprise skills. I don't know that we have enough conversation about this issue in our communities, at least on my side of the Tasman. Enterprise skills are the skills pretty much anybody needs to survive, in my book. They're the skills that enable people to see opportunities. They're the skills that enable people to recognise underutilised resources both people resources and physical resources, and to figure out how to free those resources up so that they can be better utilised in the community. They're the skills that enable people to recognise the wealth in cultural diversity in our communities. They're the skills that enable us to treat each other with respect, listening deeply and learning from one another. They're the skills that enable us to vision new futures. And I think those are skills every citizen needs, whether it's to drive your own personal career or whether it's to work within a community and envision a new future and then help put that future into place. There's been a lot of talk in the social economy about the importance of social capital, the connections between people and between communities that are so important in our life. I don't think there's really enough talk, certainly again on my side of the Tasman, not nearly enough talk about building the physical assets that our communities need. And I've been pleased to hear some conversation around physical assets here today, and I'm sure there'll be more of it at this conference. But it seems to me those are really critical for us. So, all communities need enterprising skills. Recognising opportunities, solving problems, designing solutions, making underutilised resources productive, inspiring people and building teams, and again, engaging all sectors and getting that collaboration that is important. When we talk about social enterprise and social entrepreneurship and leadership, and I'll say something more about this later, we tend to have in our mind very often the archetypal entrepreneur, the conquering hero, the cowboy that rides in solving the problems of business or creating an empire. I think actually there's a different kind of leadership that entrepreneurship really requires. And it's actually learning to lead from behind or from beside, doing with rather than for or to people, utilising people's hidden or unrecognised potential. The social enterprise approach, a sustainable business idea driven by a social vision. It's not a new idea. The label has come more recently, but really it's been happening since Adam was a boy. I think also fresh thinking about how we do innovation is important in social enterprise. Thinking freshly about the challenges we face with all stakeholders. And when we come up with solutions, asking ourselves questions like, with this particular solution, who's going to win and who's going to lose? I hope in most cases we can find win-win solutions for pretty well all of the stakeholders, but sometimes there's costs and resources need to come from someplace, and often that means somebody to somebody else. And those are things I think we need to think a lot more carefully about when we're looking at resources, particularly at a time, as most of us are going through, and even in Australia, despite our economy, we're going through, where government is cutting back significantly. Now, I happen to believe that government funds being cut back can actually be an opportunity. I know it sounds counterintuitive, or counter something or other anyway, and probably pretty distressing for those people whose jobs are on the line or whose programs are on the line. But I actually think there is an opportunity for us to think innovatively when we are having to face funding cuts. There's a very interesting study that you'll find on the web if you're interested. It's called Radical Redesign, I think. In my workshop, I'll make sure I get the reference correctly. But it's done a series of case studies of organisations that have, in the face of funding cuts, been able to actively improve and increase the service quality and the service impact that they're doing. And there's some quite interesting examples and then some distilled wisdom from that experience. And I think this is the kind of stuff we're going to need to think about. It also, when funds are being cut, encourages us to think creatively about collaboration, because we have to form new kind of partnerships when things are tough, rather than it being winners and losers, or this organisation gets and this organisation loses. In Newcastle a few years back, and it was probably 15 or 20 years ago, the trade union leaders in Newcastle, because it's a very strong union community, used to lock all the managers of the not-for-profits in the city in a room and tell them not to come out until they'd worked out how they were going to split up the resources that were available between them in a way that did best for Newcastle, not for their individual organisations. And it was a very salutary experience for those managers. They had to actually work out what was best for their city rather than what was best for their individual organisations and their own egos. I think that kind of innovation is something we could all benefit from. Also, when we're about problem solving, I think the social enterprise approach requires us to look beyond symptoms. I think too often our solutions are really, when we look at them more closely, really just dealing with the symptoms, and we need to peel back the onion to get to where the problem really is, and often it's not the thing we see first. I don't know about if that fits your experience. In the literature these days, there's quite a lot of talk about a concept called wicked problems. Wicked problems are the kind of problems, when you try and solve them in the logical, planned way, very often you make the problem worse. And so many of our social and environmental problems are wicked problems. And often you really don't know what the problem is until you've actually found the solution that works. It's quite a challenging area. But I think it requires us to think deeply about the kind of problems that our communities face and not to take the first answers that come to us. Making measurable social impact and reporting it, I think, is another critical issue. Too often, I think we don't have the evidence that our programs work for the communities in which we're working. We're doing something that looks great, that sounds great, that maybe makes the funders feel very good inside, but sometimes I'm not sure that they have the enduring impact, and that in many cases we have the evidence to prove that they work. Scalability and replication is another issue that gets a lot of conversation when social enterprise gets talked about. What kind of scale is the right scale for this program? And replication doesn't necessarily mean franchising. I've been quite involved in the School for Social Entrepreneurs, which some of you may have been heard about, and Faye, who I know is here, is involved in helping set up the School for Social Entrepreneurs program here in New Zealand. I've been involved in that, which is a franchise model. So we're taking a concept that's been well developed in the UK, we've brought it to Australia, and we now have 60 social entrepreneurs graduating each year from courses in Sydney and Melbourne. And I'm really excited about the results that we're achieving using that model. However, I think in many cases scale has to be thought about quite critically and quite carefully, because often I think we find that diffusion is as good a way as replication. Sharing the knowledge and adapting the model. So I think it's a horses for courses proposition here. But the fact is, doing stuff on a really small scale where you're hardly touching anybody and you're only touching the fringe of the problem isn't good enough any longer. I don't know about you, but if I can help 5 people, that's lovely. But when the problem is 500,000 people, then it really needs to be worked on in a different way. And often I think our vision is too small. and we're planning too small. Really, we need to get better than that. Building ownership by service users is important. Connell spoke about that in his presentation, and I think probably as I reflect back on WorkVentures and our experience, it's probably one of the things we've not done as well as I would like. The sense of ownership, moving our client group from being employees to being owners of the business is something we haven't yet achieved. And that'll be for the next generation to solve. But at WorkVentures, I think perhaps it's something we should have designed into our solution. I've talked about inter-sector collaboration across sectors. I also think intra-sector collaboration amongst the community and not-for-profit sector is very important. I used to have a saying that the most dangerous place to be was standing between $1.50 and 3 not-for-profit organisations. I don't know whether that fits your experience, but unfortunately non-profits, I think, are far more aggressively and immaturely competitive often than private sector organisations I've worked with. We feel very strongly in the social space about the importance of egalitarianism and at teams and at the importance of people working collaboratively together. Sometimes I think in the course of that we forget the value and the importance of capable leadership. I don't mean ego-driven, power-hungry leadership. I mean good leadership. I mean leadership that listens, leadership that works collaboratively, but still is leadership nonetheless. And, often I think leadership isn't one skill, it's 50 skills. It's the ability to have vision, it's the ability to see opportunities, and often there's a team playing that leadership role, but very often too, there's somebody who is playing that inspiring role that brings the group together, and I think that kind of social entrepreneurship is something we need to both encourage and value when we see it. Building high-performance teams is also a critical part of that mix. I think we need leadership and advocacy to move inertia and silo mentalities in and out of our own sector and also in government. Some may say that's needed in business. And I think, by the way, we have a lot to learn from business in the social sector, and I think we have a lot to share with business that it can learn from us. Social entrepreneurs need strong business and government allies. Effective entrepreneurs build community support for innovation and recognise that there will always be entrenched interests that will fight that innovation. And being able to recognise that and work out how to deal with that opposition, because there are barriers to change. If you want to change the world, there are going to be some folks whose interests are to keep things the way they are. And I think we have to be thoughtful about that. Lastly, I don't know about in this country, but in Australia, whether it's social enterprise, social entrepreneurship or social innovation, these words are becoming quite buzzwords that a lot of people want to be a part of, and particularly as government or the philanthropic sector show interest in putting money into those activities, I think that the field tends to attract what I call shonky operators who dress their old-fashioned charity solution in the social enterprise mantle and try to get away with that. And I think we have to be thoughtful about what are the distinguishing features of social enterprise that make it different from the old charity model. Open and ethical collaboration is also important. Okay, now I want to tell you a bit about my own story and, in a sense, illustrate some of the points I've just made, but talk about it from the reality as well. It was founded in 1979. I was part of a local Anglican parish, and I was whinging about the fact that the church wasn't really engaged with its community. And the priest in my parish challenged me to leave my job in government, which I wasn't particularly enjoying, and come and put my money where my mouth is, without a salary, I might add, to see whether I could do something. We created a community development agency in the parish. It was called Peninsula Community Services at the time. And in 1986, we moved into employment and economic development. Well, we started in 1984 with a project called CompuSkill, which was a computer training centre. As an organisation, we started with a $3,000 loan and a second-hand clothing shop that we ran, an op shop. But over the years, the organisation built quite a reputation. And in fact, by 2001, we'd grown to be about a $20 million operation, employing over 200 full-time staff. I learned something from the Catholic Sisters of Charity who ran St Vincent's, or who run St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney. They had a saying that there is no mission without a margin. For organisations who think they can run on the smell of an oily rag and for whom the word profit is a dirty word, that was actually quite a shock to me. I'm a social worker by training, and I grew up thinking that we could run on the smell of an oily rag. Another southern black pastor in the US told me that social justice is all about who controls the assets. You know the saying that when the missionaries came to our country, they had the Bible and we had the land, and then when they finished, we had the Bible and they had the land. It's all about who controls assets. Combining vision and values. Very important. But the second bit for me, which is the toughest bit, I have to tell you, I'm great on the ideas. The execution is where I struggle. And that's why I need a really good team to work with, because putting an initiative into practice requires excellent execution. And I think that's where the entrepreneurial types sometimes don't do it so well. We grew to about $20 million and at about 25% a year compounded growth over 25 years. We were placing, and I'm gone from this organisation, by the way. ASICS, the Social Innovation Exchange that I currently work with, is a very small startup. 2,500 job seekers placed into jobs and about 100 new business startups each year. We had locations in Sydney and also a factory in Melbourne. I'll just run through this bit of history. It's not all that interesting. Here are a list of businesses we ran, and I might add, there's a saying in work ventures that a good learning experience is something that cost us at least $10,000. Along this list here, there's quite a few good learning experiences. Other people have used photographs, so I dumped a few photographs in here this morning just to... this is what we looked like in 1986. I want to talk about a particular enterprise that was created that I think probably is our best success story. It began in 1988. We were training unemployed people in electronics, and we hired some guys from the Navy. We were a churchy bunch of folks who were all into pacifism and we didn't believe in war and all the rest of it. And these guys were guided weapons instructors and repairers. So we found there was a little bit of culture kind of clash. In some ways, I think probably one of the most creative culture clashes for us and for them. They came to us to train unemployed people in electronics. And They actually started, first of all, we were getting 95% of the graduates from our program into jobs with companies like IBM and NCR, Fujitsu, a range of other companies around the city. But these guys, they're pretty smart, and talking about recognising underutilised assets, they went around companies like IBM and they were looking for stuff they could scrounge. And also, in the course of it, they found there was quite a lot of stuff IBM at that stage wasn't repairing. It was crushing them and importing a new part because they figured it wasn't economically worthwhile. And we went to these guys, and this was before there was big talk about the environment movement or whatever. We went to these guys and we said, we reckon we can repair those. What is it costing you to bring a new one in? I think it was from Canada at that point. And in those days, a computer keyboard, which is what we started repairing, was worth several $100s. It wasn't a throwaway item like it is today. Or like many people treat it today. So we started in that with employing a few of our trainees in the corner of a training classroom repairing keyboards, but gradually the company like IBM recognised that we actually could do good work, and also they recognised their overheads and their costs of doing business were very high, and actually they were quite inefficient at repairing things. And so they began outsourcing a lot of their repair services, and we got quite a large chunk of it. And over time, they closed down the NCR, then the IBM, and later the Fujitsu National Repair Centres. They were closed down because the company started outsourcing all of its services. We were fortunate in that we basically picked up a lot of their retrenchees who are guys with massive amount of experience, like 20 and 30 years. Maybe not too many qualifications, because in those days most people learned their electronics by as hobbyists or on the bench. So not so many qualifications. That was one of the good things about this industry from our point of view. It was an industry that was new and wide open. I'm talking the 80s here. So that you didn't need qualifications to get a job. So an unemployed person who had good skills had a great opportunity. And so we set up a business that now employs over 110 workers, the majority of whom were long-term unemployed clients. This business started in 1988. Many of the people who we employed back in the 80s are now managers managing multi-million-dollar contracts with large corporations. So we've seen quite a massive change in that group of people and in the work that they do, and several $100,000 a year coming back into Work Ventures organisation to support the other work we do in disadvantaged communities in running technology learning centres and a whole range of other things. So it means we're less dependent on government, and we've also got a sustainable business. And there are bonus schemes and all kinds of other things that give people a sense of ownership. And I tell you what, one of our problems was we wanted companies to poach from our employees, i.e. we'd train these folks up in our training course, we'd then bring them into our own business, skill them up so they really had the experience, not just the practical skills, but some real live work experience, and we hoped companies would poach. Our biggest challenge was our staff didn't want to go. And in fact, over time, as the business grew stronger, we also needed the greater skills that they were acquiring. We're now a major national business, and in the high volume electronics repair services, Sydney iTech Repair Centre would be one of the largest players in the Australian market. For a while we ran a factory unit in partnership with another organisation here in Auckland. I don't know what happened to it. It was linked to NCR. Peter Garrett may be known to some of you. This is my brag on one of the visits he paid to our organisation. Second case study I want to do quite briefly is to talk about another social enterprise that we ran whose purpose was not just job generation, but whose purpose was bridging the digital divide. The major bank, by the way, is Westpac. I'm pleased to hear that they are going to be here at this conference and playing an active role. We have had a major relationship with Westpac now well over 15 years, I guess, and have found an extraordinary partnership. Microsoft was probably our first corporate partner, Linda Graham, who set up Microsoft in Australia in the early 80s. But back to the Westpac story. Westpac has or had, I don't know exactly what the numbers are now, but about 25,000 PCs around Australia. And about every 3 to 4 years, those computers were being turned over. One of the challenges that all companies have is that sometimes when they sell the computers, the hard disk doesn't get scrubbed exactly the way it should be. And from time to time, various banks were finding that their hard disks were turning up and people were finding they could access the data on your bank account or mine. We haven't had any of that problem since WorkVentures took over managing Westpac's computer refurbishment program. We were able to refurbish those computers, upgrade their memories, and Microsoft would donate the software for low-income families. And we have something like 30 to 40,000 Australian families who currently have a PC, low-income families living on Centrelink benefits, whose kids wouldn't have had access to a PC, who have been able to get a PC and internet access as a result of this initiative. And the business also runs a call centre which employs unemployed people or people who have gone through our training programs. And also we've created a pathway for people to new skills and employment. We're playing around with the franchise network. However, we've found that in fact, in a partnership we have with Toll, we can get a computer to somebody anywhere in Australia almost cheaper than it could be than having multiple locations around the country. This is another brag. This is the award we won in 2005, I think it was, with the Prime Minister's Community Business Partnership for our 25-year partnership with Microsoft. Just to show that I'm even-handed about both sides of the political fence. So, some reflections on all of that experience. I mentioned we've had a lot of good learning experiences. I've shown you examples of 2 ventures that were amongst WorkVentures' successes. As I say, there are many ventures that didn't make it and that we had to put down quickly and quietly. I still carry the scars of that experience. We took over an organisation, another not-for-profit organisation that was in bad financial shape at one point. I think that cost several $100,000, so that's a very challenging learning experience. We set up a restaurant, training unemployed and homeless young people in restaurant skills in Newtown in Sydney's inner west in the 90s. And I think that cost certainly over 100,000 anyway. So there are some challenging experiences there. I learned that you need really good people who are going to run the business like it was their own if a venture is going to succeed. We call that person an enterprise champion. My saying for that person, you need to find an enterprise champion who's willing to make this venture work or kill themselves in the attempt. It's not easy to find those kind of folks. Another thing I'd say in reflection is that we have been good at ideas generation as an organisation over the years, but many of our ideas have been copied and bettered by others. People used to say, I had the ideas, other people were great at making them work. WorkVentures is still a substantial and growing organisation, and I stuck around for 28 years. So it's not that I was just a Johnny-come-lately, if you like, but balancing financial and social is very tough. In the electronics business that I talked about, we constantly had to figure out where was our social bottom line and where was our financial bottom line. There were occasions when business turned down where we had to retrench people. I don't know about how your experience of that has been, but mine is it's one of the horror experiences of my life, needing to see people retrenched from our organisation. But the reality is it had to happen, or the whole organisation would have gone down and everybody with it. There are times when people felt we should push harder on the social end. There are times when others felt we should push harder on the financial return end. Balancing that is hard, but having a good team with people who see both sides of that, I think, has been very important for us. I'm probably somebody who's a little more on the social end. I've had some pretty tough negotiators with whom I've worked who have pushed harder on the financial end, including some of my board members. Thank you. Taking risks with other people's jobs. As the organisation gets bigger, it's harder and harder to take risks. Am I building an organisation or a movement? In a way, that was another challenge for us. And for me, it was, I spent probably quite a few years, if you add it all up, setting up new organisations while I was the CEO of Workventures. And some of those organisations were, in fact, organisations that potentially could be Workventures competitors. Now, my board agreed to allow me to do it, and other people agreed to carry the load of running Workventures while I was doing those things. But Social Ventures Australia, Job Futures, a number of other organisations that I was involved in establishing did take a lot out of Workventures, but we felt it was important. We felt those organisations were important and that, in a sense, Workventures' growth could be constrained by that. We've talked about measuring impact. Who gets the credit? I think what's important is that everybody shares the credit. I'm the one who picked up the Prime Minister's Award or, had those kind of acknowledgements, and I have to admit, as the upfront leader, that was part of the fun. I'm also the one with the scars. My last two reflections, shared ownership and individualism. It's a hard one, and I think we need more collaborative skills and more collaborative people. But working out how to share ownership is actually not easy when you have visionary people and egos and all the rest of it, and we all have them. So don't pretend otherwise. But leadership, power and egos is one of the things that I think we need to spend a little more time studying, and studying in a more nuanced way than perhaps we do. Because I think leadership isn't a simple concept. It's a much more complex and multivariate concept. I won't do this presentation, but this will come up in my workshop tomorrow if people are interested in exploring these questions. And the various forms of enterprise. The affirmative business is the point where you get ownership at the end of the trail. So I think this field is one that needs a lot more thought and a lot more work together. I hope you found this input stimulating, and I hope it will provoke some more conversations over the next couple of days. Thank you.